Hi guys, here to finish chapter 13 and then read chapter 14 to you today. Um, I don't know where I left off on the page, so I'll just start again. So Luxa showed up, right? Um, isn't that enough? Said Luxa, avoiding his gaze. Sure, I thought. Well, maybe it had something to do with. Gregor stopped himself. With what? Said Luxa. With nothing, said Gregor. Forget it. I can hardly forget it now, said Luxa. Why else would I come? Because of Henry. I mean, if I were you, I might come to show people I wasn't like him. I might come to make Stelivet shut up, said Gregor. Luxa didn't like to admit that he was right, but she didn't deny it either. So what's the deal with he who gets to be king and queen here? Gregor said after a while. My father's family has been on the throne for some time. As his only child, I am to rule next. If I have children, the oldest will follow me. Even if it's a girl and she has brothers? Gregor thought girls only got to rule if there were no boys in the family. Oh, yes, girls have equal claim to the throne, said Luxa. If I have no children, the crown will go to Nerissa, but she is last in our line, so if she dies or abdicates without children, Regalia will have to choose a new royal family. And Stelivet thinks it will be her family, said Gregor. She's probably right. Vicus and Solivet will be the most likely choice. Their oldest child, my Aunt Susanna, would follow, and her children, my font cousins. Howard is the eldest, said Luxa. Sounds like Stelivet's a long way from becoming queen anyway, said Gregor. Not as long as you might think. Not in the Underland, said Luxa. The bats who had been flying around came in for bedtime. Marith put Howard's red bat Pandora and Aries on guard. Gregor had a feeling he wasn't going to be assigned that duty for a while. Twitch-Tip was restless. Something's not right, she said. She lifted her nose in the air, and her head made an involuntary jerk to the side. Is it more squid? Said Gregor, looking into the deep. No, it's not an animal, but something's not right, she repeated. In what way? Asked Aries. With the water, she said. Is it tainted, frigid, filled with debris? Asked Howard. No, said Twitch-Tip. I'd recognize those things. It's something I don't have a word for. But she could not explain further, so there was nothing to do but settle down into an uneasy sleep. A few hours later, Gregor awoke to the sound of rushing water and Howard's frantic voice screaming the word that Twitch-Tip didn't have. Whirlpool! Chapter 14. Whirlpool. The only thing Gregor could think of was the game. His cousins had an old round above ground pool. All the kids would try to run around in a circle and make the water swirl around so there was a sort of funnel effect in the middle. He knew there were real whirlpools in the ocean, but he'd never seen a picture of one. Gregor jumped to his feet and tried to make sense of the situation. Everyone was up, but they were confused too. The Underlanders usually faced an emergency with precision, as if they'd been drilled for the crisis a million times. Gregor had the feeling that none of them had ever dealt with a whirlpool either, and that they had no emergency response at the ready. Photos Glow and Zap were burning at full brightness, but there still wasn't enough light to see far out into the water. Gregor pulled out the biggest flashlight he had, one with a wide, sweeping beam, and clicked it on. What he saw took his breath away. The boats were on the outer edge of a huge vortex. The whirlpool must have been at least 100 yards wide. The water was rushing at a dizzying speed, grasping at anything in its reach, carrying it around and around until he was sucked down back into a black, gaping hole in the center. Howard and Marith were shouting at each other across the rope that tethered the two boats. I'm cutting loose, Howard yelled as he began to hack away at the rope between him. No, Marith cried. The flyers will carry us out. They can only take one boat. Do it, Marith. Pandora can come back for me, Howard shouted, and the rope severed under his sword. It was just in the nick of time. The lead boat, containing Howard, Pandora, Twitch-Tip, and Zap, was snagged by the outer ring of the whirlpool and carried off into the maelstrom. It was only a matter of seconds before the second boat would meet the same fate. Gregor lunged to the stern for Boots, who was still half asleep, so he could get her back in her life jacket. He'd taken it off so she could sleep comfortably. Obviously, that had been a bad decision. He fumbled with the jacket's tangled straps. The boat suddenly yanked to the side. It's got us, Gregor cried out. But then there was an upward jerk. Gregor sprawled forward, barely avoiding crushing Boots, and found they were rising out of the water. The bats were lifting them using the rope loops on the side of the boats. Aurora and Andromeda were in the front, Aries and Pandora in the back. Go, Pandora. Aries can take it. Go, Gregor heard Marith order. Aries spread his feet, holding his own loop-in claw and grasping Pandora's in the other. The boat dipped down a bit, but the big black bat soon had it under control. Man, he's strong, thought Gregor. Pandora hovered for one moment to make sure Ares had things covered, then dove. Gregor leaned over the side of the boat to see what was going on. They were 50 feet above the water now, safe from the clutches of the raging whirlpool, but below them was another matter. The lead boat, with Howard and Twitch-Tip clinging to the mast, was spinning helplessly around the whirlpool, smashing into debris, buckling under the pressure of the current. Except for the light from Gregor's flashlight, the boat was in complete darkness. "This certainly is an inconvenience," said a whiny voice by his ear. Gregor turned to see Zap sitting on a coil of rope. It was my time to sleep, too. I hope Photos Glow does not think this means I will cover his next shift. "Zap, what are you doing? Get down there so they can see," said Gregor. "Oh no, we never agree to go into dangerous situations. We're not fed enough for that." And then he actually yawned. Gregor spun back around to the whirlpool in time to see Howard launch himself out of the water, arms straight out to his sides. Pandora caught him by the arms and carried him straight up to safety. She set Howard in a soggy pile on the floor and took her rope handle back from Ares. Down in the water, Twitch-Tip still clung desperately to the mast. The boat was quickly approaching the inner rings of the whirlpool and the black hole in the center. "Wait a minute," Gregor cried. "Aren't you going back for Twitch-Tip?" There was no answer. He looked to Marith, to Luxa, to Howard dripping and panting on the floor. Something in their faces made a chill go through them. "She's going to drown, you know. We've got to get in there." "It's not possible, Overlander," said Marith. "We cannot reach her by boat. A single flyer could not get hold of her. It's not possible." "Luxa," said Gregor. "She was the queen. She could probably make them do it if she wanted to." "I think Marith is right. We will risk more loss in the effort, and the likelihood of success is almost non-existent." "But we need her. We need her to navigate the labyrinth," said Gregor. Why were they just standing there? "The bats will be sufficient," said Marith, "and they can be trusted." So that was it. Now he understood. "It's because she's a rat," he said. "You're just going to sit there and watch her drown because she's a rat, right? If it were Howard or Andromeda or even Temp, you'd be down there all right, but not for a rat. You'd probably have killed her already if you could have." Below him, Twitch-Tip's boat snapped in two. She clung to the wreckage for a few seconds, and then it was swept out of her grasp. She clawed her way through the water, fighting to keep from going under. But she wouldn't last long. The life jacket was on the floor next to Boots. He shoved his arms through the straps and buckled it with shaking hands. The small flashlight, the one Mrs. Cormacy had given him, was in his pocket. He flicked it on. Maybe he could hold it between his teeth. Hands grabbed him as he climbed up the side of the boat. "Don't be a madman, Overlander," said Howard. "You cannot help her." "You make me the sickest of them all," said Gregor. "You were just down there a minute ago. You got rescued. And what about what you swore about saving anyone in water trouble, in peril? What you said? What about that?" Howard's face flushed. Gregor had touched a nerve. "Gregor," Luxa held his hand. "I forbid you to go, Gregor. You will not survive." "Not with you guys as backup," said Gregor. He was so furious he could have thrown her over the side of the boat. See how she liked it down there. "Rip Red brought her for me. He brought her to help me so I could help you guys in your whole stupid kingdom," he says. "That's why we're doing this, right?" He stood on one of the seats and shone his light down in the water. Man, was he really going to jump down into that? They were right, it was insane. Even if they had the best Olympic swimmer in the world, he'd never swim his way out of that, especially pulling some big old rat. But he knew something else, too. He knew the Underlanders needed to keep him alive at all costs. If he went in, they'd come after him. And if he could get to Twitch-Tip, they'd have to save them both. Howard started lashing something around his body. "Untie me," said Gregor, taking a swing at him. "It's a lifeline," Howard said, ducking the blow. "We will hold on to you from this end." "You will?" said Gregor. "Do not fight the current. It will have no effect. Ride it as best you can." Gregor balanced on the edge of the boat for 1 second, stuck the flashlight between his teeth, braced himself, tried to forget about how much he hated high dives, and jumped. The shock of the cold water occupied him for about a millisecond before all his attention was on the current. He was nothing, a twig, a gum wrapper, an ant being carried along by the immense force of the whirlpool. He felt himself yanked back up by the rope they had him from above. He was being lifted, swung out over the dark, sucking hole in the center of the whirlpool. For a moment he had the crazy idea that they were going to drop him into it, but then he understood. Twitch-Tip was on the inner rings of the vortex, maybe one, maybe 2 times more around, and then she was gone. As they swung in to meet her, Gregor tried to think of how he could get a hold of the rat. There was no time to work out a strategy. As he came in, he did the one thing that came naturally. He opened his arms. They smacked into each other, chest to chest. His arms encircled her neck, his legs wrapped around her body. Twitch-Tip dug her claws into the front of his life jacket. They spun around the whirlpool again. The current locked them in, pulling them down, not wanting to let them go. "They can't do it," thought Gregor. "We're going under." He squeezed his eyes shut tightly, waiting to be engulfed. Instead, there was a rib-crushing tug, and suddenly they were swinging free. Twitch-Tip's full weight hit him. If the rat hadn't gotten one claw embedded in the rope, he would have lost her. "Don't let go," she choked out. Gregor couldn't free his teeth from the flashlight. He'd bitten down so hard, he managed to open his mouth enough to say no. They were carried over the water for a little while, until they were out of the whirlpool's reach. Then they were in the waves, half treading water, half using the life jacket to stay afloat as the Underlanders reeled them in. Hands pulled them into the boat. When he felt the floor beneath them, he released the rat. They lay side by side, gasping, coughing up water. This was extra tricky for Gregor, since his teeth were still stuck in the flashlight. His ribs hurt from the final tug that had freed them. He hoped he was just bruised, not broken. If they ached, the pain was minimal compared to his arm. The bandage had been torn away by the current, and now Gregor could see it in all its glory. His whole forearm was badly swollen. The sucker wounds, which had turned a revolting shade of purple, oozed fluorescent green pus. They burned as if they were on fire. Howard was at his side. He helped Gregor free his teeth from the flashlight and laid it on the floor. Gregor had a funny memory. When Mrs. Cormacy had given him the flashlight, she'd made a point of telling him it was waterproof. It even had a little sticker on the bottom that said so. He thought at the time that was silly. Why would he need a waterproof flashlight? Now he knew. Gregor gritted his teeth as Howard flushed the wounds on his arms and poured a cooling solution over the skin and bandaged it in fresh fabric. "I know this comes a bit late," said Howard, "but try to keep it dry." There was something in his eyes that reminded Gregor of his grandfather Vicus, of Howard's grandfather Vicus. An odd twinkle, even when the rest of his face remained serious. Gregor couldn't help laughing. "Yeah, I'll do that." Howard toweled off Twitch-Tip and wrapped her in blankets. She was too exhausted to object when he poured a bottle of medicine down her throat. She went to sleep almost immediately. "Is she all right?" Gregor asked. "Yes, we must keep her warm. The cold water has been a shock, but she is a fighter," Howard said with respect. Boots came up and stuck a cookie in Gregor's mouth. "You wet?" "Yeah," he said, spraying crumbs as he talked. "Boots go swim? We go swim?" she said hopefully. Gregor was glad she hadn't been able to see over the side of the boat. "Nah, it's too cold," said Gregor. "I tried it. It's too cold, Boots." Boots took a second cookie and poked the rest in Gregor's mouth. "Yesterday? We go yesterday?" She got time all mixed up. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, later, before, all pretty much meant any time that wasn't right now. "Maybe when we get home and it gets warm again." "I'll take you in the pool, okay?" said Gregor. "Yes," said Boots. She patted his chest. "You wet." Gregor got on some dry clothes and wrapped himself up in the blanket. He had to take his boots off for a while. They were waterproof, but not in a whirlpool. The boat was packed now, with all 13 of them in it. Somehow everyone found a place, but it was tight. Luxa sat next to Gregor and handed him something. "Here, I made you a sandwich." He looked down at the clunky version of a roast beef sandwich. He had taught her to make the first sandwich on their last trip. "Thanks." He didn't need it. "Don't be angry with us, Gregor. Meredith and I have lost more than you know to the rats. It's hard for us to risk anything to save one, even if it is of use," said Luxa. "She. Twitch-Tip is a she, and she's had a bad time too. The rats chased her out because she's a scent seer, and she's been living all alone in the Deadlands," said Gregor. "Has she?" said Luxa. "I did not know about her." "Well, no, because no one talks to her," Gregor said. Then he felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't been talking to her either. He hadn't wanted to ride in her boat, but at least he'd gone to save her. "She's incredible. You should see her in action, I mean. Maybe she didn't know what a whirlpool was, but she could tell all the way from the arena to the palace what color shirt Boots was wearing. And once we're in the labyrinth thing, I think she's the only way we'll find the Bane." His words were tumbling out now. He couldn't stop them, and he couldn't organize them quite right either. "And Rip Red brought her. Vicus told me once he had wisdom unique. Well, more wisdom than, like, practically anyone, okay? So if he brought her, we must need her. And anyway, besides that, it's no good, Luxa." He paused. "It's no good to sit up in the boat and watch her drown." Gregor took a bite of the sandwich, more to stop talking than anything. It was all so confusing, the whole thing with the rats and the humans. They had killed Luxa's parents, and he didn't know how many others she loved. Another thought struck him. Helping a rat doesn't make you like Henry, you know? "You see it that way. Others may not," she said. They sat in silence while he ate his sandwich. He couldn't argue with her there.